Okay, so start World War II, after the American involvement, beginning in September 1940, at the urging of FDR, Congress is going to start to move away from neutrality. Okay, slowly but surely. All of this, of course, coincides with the Battle of Britain, the attack on England by the German Air Force. Remember I told you that the British are asking for help. There's really nothing we can do. Our hands are totally tied legally. But beginning in September, things are going to start to change. So let's talk about how the U.S. starts to break away with neutrality in these legislative deals, okay? So the first one is a destroyers for bases deal. This one takes place in September 1940. And what happens in this deal is the U.S. agrees to give the British, to trade 50 American destroyers, okay? These are ships in exchange for the rights to use British naval bases, okay? So no money is exchanging hands whatsoever, but it's reversing our neutrality acts instead of saying that, we cannot give them any weapons or anything like that. We are trading 50 American destroyers in exchange for use of British military bases, okay, naval bases. So we're starting to step away from that neutrality. Next comes the Selective Training and Service Act. This, of course, is the draft, right? This is the first time that the U.S. has had a draft, and we were not at war, okay? So very, very significant here. But as things begin to get more desperate, FDR is looking to convince the American people, start preparing them for the possibility that we might have to go to war. So he needs to start, spelling out what are those things that are worth fighting for. And so in January 1941, FDR makes a State of the Union speech, which is also known as a For Freedom speech, okay? In this speech, FDR is lining out, he's making a statement about what he's fighting for, but he's also trying to sort of draw a line and make a clear differences between us versus Nazi Germany, this fascist government. So the first one is freedom of speech. Okay, this one has to do with our First Amendment right, and of course that it does not exist in a fascist government. So he's trying to remind people about that. The other freedom that he talks about is freedom of religion, which is, of course, another thing that Americans hold to be very valuable. And at the same time, in Nazi Germany, Hitler is going after other religions as well. Number 3, freedom from want. Okay, and if you notice this picture here, this one is trying to remind people about the Depression, poverty, freedom from poverty. Remember that part of the reason why Germans embraced Hitler was because of the economic crisis. So, we're trying to keep away from that. We're trying to stay away from that again. Freedom, where is it? Freedom from fear, up here. Freedom from fear. Now, he's basically saying here that people have a right not to be afraid, especially in their own homes. And this, of course, is a problem if you're in Britain or if you're in a country that is being terrorized by the Nazis, right? So he's, again, like I said, he is trying to remind people that there are these certain freedoms that are worth fighting for. Norman Rockwell is going to paint, these paintings that go along with the For Freedom speech. Norman Rockwell is also the guy that painted this over here, right? My little Rosie the Riveter that I have in the front of the page. Come on now, there it is. That's a Norman Rockwell painting. Which, by the way, if we analyze this, I don't know if you guys ever noticed that she's stepping on a copy of Mein Kampf, right? So Rosie the Riveter, we'll talk about her when we get to the women. But again, he makes these paintings. They go on this traveling exhibition, and notice how they say buy war bonds, right? It's a success, right? They raised over $130 million in war bonds that they're going to use to go towards paying for the war. Oh, okay. So ultimately, for freedom of speech, super effective. But our biggest break yet, where is it? Yes, our biggest break yet with neutrality is going to be the Lease Act right here, which takes place in March 1941. And this one basically says that the United States is going to lend or lease whatever the British need to fight this war. Okay, to lend or lease whatever the British need to fight this war. Now, the initial allotment for this was $7 billion with a B. But by the end of the war, it's going to be closer to $50 billion. Now, none of this loan money was actually ever paid back, but it's okay. You know, in the end, we actually got so much more. The economy benefited. It built up our economy. It built up our economy, I should say. So much of that debt was forgiven. Okay. Well, all of it was forgiven, actually. Anyways, okay, so Lend-Lease Act, Selective Training and Service Act, Destroyer for Bases deal, all of these are going to be the ways that the U.S. is going to start to move away from neutrality, okay? Now let's talk about the first of the many conferences to come. The Atlantic Charter Conference takes place in August 1941. You, of course, already know that because you did that assignment for me the other day. This is a picture here of Churchill and FDR meeting aboard a ship in the middle of the Atlantic. I think it was close to Newfoundland. But anyways, what was this meeting all about? What did they say? They basically make a declaration that was very close to what Wilson's 14 points was like. And this meeting is also significant because, not only did they talk about freedom of the seas, trade, reduction of armaments, all of that, but they discover, Churchill and FDR, discover how much they have in common. They become fast friends, really, and they bond over their mutual distrust of Stalin and their hate for Hitler. Okay, so they become really good friends out of this. And again, that charter is important because it will be the basis upon which these countries later on create the United Nations. Okay, so, all right. Let's see. We are now at the point where, the Atlantic Charter Conference is the only one of these conferences that takes place before the U.S. gets involved. The other ones to come, like Tehran, Potsdam, all of those are going to, Yalta, all of those are going to come after. And so it's important to put these things into context. I want to go back to what is happening with Japan. Okay. So obviously, tensions will continue to grow. The Sino-Japanese War is going on. The Americans, of course, are on the side of China. And so what this means is that Japanese-American relations are going to deteriorate, okay? The Sino-Japanese War is a brutal war. And in 1940, Japan is going to sign the Axis Agreement with Germany and Italy, okay? And so in response to that, the United States is going to start to impose sanctions on Japan, okay, primarily by freezing accounts in the United States. Any properties that the Japanese might have in the United States are all going to be frozen, any bank accounts. But also the U.S. is going to deny them steel, okay, raw materials, no scrap metal. And of course, Japanese is very dependent on this, because they're in the middle of a war. And so, the United States kind of, it's difficult to say whether the attack on Pearl Harbor was really a surprise, because we kind of knew that our relationship wasn't really good with Japan. But the attack on December 7th, 1941 was most definitely a surprise by any means. It was on a Sunday. It was, early in the morning. It totally caught the people off guard. They were very unprepared. It's Sunday. People usually are going to church or they're sleeping in. And the Japanese, there had been kind of like these rumblings and rumors, and by then the United States had been able to break their code. But they kind of knew an attack was coming, but they didn't know where it was going to be or when. And they certainly didn't expect for it to be on Pearl Harbor. They thought it was too far. But of course, some of those guys, the plan was not to refuel, right? Their plan was to use their planes as bombs, right? And do kamikaze, these suicide missions. But anyways, after the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor, the American fleet is going to suffer major losses here. Over 2,400 Americans are killed, 1,100 are injured, 19 ships are going to be sunk or completely destroyed. 200 planes are destroyed here. I mean, really, the only reason why we had any of the fleet left over was because some of it was out at sea. Otherwise, I mean, we could have been completely wiped out. So we were totally unprepared. We were caught off guard. And in addition to that, the Japanese didn't just attack Pearl Harbor. They attacked other U.S. territories like Guam and the Philippines, Midway, and the British held Hong Kong and Singapore. So it was like a 5-pronged, multiple, well-coordinated attack that was supposed to essentially like deal a devastating blow to the United States, with the idea that, you would knock out the U.S. quickly and not have to deal with them. But of course, it didn't work out that way. So on December 8, 1941, FDR is going to go to Congress and ask for a declaration of war. Coming on December 7th will be a day that will live in infamy. Okay. I do have footage of what that attack was like. So if you have a chance to look at that, the Japanese actually recorded it for their own propaganda purposes. I have a recording of FDR making that speech to Congress asking for a declaration of war. And so now things are going to change. Okay. At the Arcadia Conference, which takes place after the attack on Pearl Harbor from December 1941, FDR and Winston Churchill are there. Oh, excuse me. And this is where they established the Europe First policy. Okay, this is important because Churchill is able to convince FDR that even though Japan is the one that attacked the U.S., the bigger threat at this point is Hitler. Okay, so they're going to concentrate on fighting him first. And so that's going to happen. That is going to definitely shape. By the way, the Americans are not ready to go to war yet. I mean, they have to put men through basic training. We already have a presence in the Pacific. That is true. And the thing that I want you to remember or consider, if you didn't know this already, is that a lot of the fighting is being done by the Soviets. The Soviets are the ones that are holding out Hitler in the East. And so at this Arcadia Conference, Winston Churchill is able to convince FDR, come and help us out. We really need your help. Hitler is a bigger threat, and so they will start preparing for such an advance on Nazi Germany for sure. Okay, but it's not going to be easy. The first thing that they have to do is try to come up with a plan, to attack Germany. Are they going to work their way from the outside or from underneath? What's going to happen? And of course, Stalin is desperate. He wants them to open a new front like now. And so eventually what will happen is the Allies, the British and the Americans are going to attack from North Africa and then up Italy. And they'll be able to, turn the tide there relatively quickly. So by 1943, the Allies are beginning to defeat the Italians. They're able to defeat the Germans. Rommel, the desert fox is out there in North Africa. And so they will begin to work their way back up towards Europe, at which point, you start to see the Italians really kind of collapse, okay? Let me see, do I have it here? Yeah, Italy surrenders September 1943. So I have a picture of Benito Mussolini right here and his wife or girlfriend, who were captured and killed by their own people. Okay, by that point, they're really kind of seen as puppets, and they kind of like lost all respect for him. And of course, the war is not going well, so that's essentially what happened to him. But now we got to talk about the Tehran Conference, okay? Because this is the one where FDR, Stalin, and Churchill are going to be at. So it's the first conference that Stalin is going to be in. This one takes place in Tehran, Iran, in December 1943. And it's important because here is where they start to plan for the D-Day invasion, right? So some kind of invasion where they are going to come in and liberate France and be able to come in and push back the Germans back to the east. Okay? D-Day, or Designated Day, or Operation Overlord as it's also known, will take place on June 6, 1944. Now, look at how the Tehran Conference is in December 1943, and the invasion is not until June. And the reason for this is because it takes a lot of time, to do all the planning, all the coordination, all the logistics of it. Everything has to be just right. And so Dwight D. Eisenhower is going to oversee the operations in D-Day. They will land at Normandy and eventually try to push their way into. Now, the whole thing was just a big, not a mistake, but man, everything that could have gone bad really did. The weather wasn't cooperating. They landed like at the wrong time of day. Like the tide wasn't in. And it made things extremely difficult for them. They were fighting uphill, which, of course is difficult for the person fighting, below, because, they're shooting at you. You're such easy targets. And so there's like these waves of soldiers that are coming in, and it's just so difficult for them to be able to make it up until those beaches. But once they do, and once they're able to come around and capture those initial fronts, then it'll be a matter of weeks before they're able to move past the German front line, and the Germans will begin to retreat. Okay, it's not easy by any means. It is super difficult, but they're able to do it, and they're able to liberate Paris as well. 2 months after they land in what do you call it, in Normandy. Okay, so it's going to take about 2 more months before they're able to liberate Paris. But once they do, they're able to push. They can almost taste it. They can feel it, that the war is nearly over. All they got to do is they got to push back the Germans across the border. They're able to liberate Belgium and France as well. So the last major battle for the Germans is in December 1942 was the last major offensive known as the Battle of the Bulge, okay, Bulge. Now, it's called the Battle of the Bulge because of this little, the bulge that you see right here, okay? So as they're pushing back the troops, the Germans, back to Germany, this is where the front line is going to be, okay? There's a lot of new troops that are stationed here. You see the 3rd Army, the 12th, the 1st Army, the 9th. They are told essentially to, wait a second. Yes. They are told essentially to wait there and, the war is almost over, and we just gotta do one last push. Well, a lot of these guys that are waiting there in the forest, in the Ardennes forest, they report that, they're hearing movement, they hear tanks, and they think something is coming, and so they report this to their commanding officers, and they tell them, look, nothing's happening, they're just trying to scare you, they're playing, recordings and stuff like that. And they don't believe it. They feel that something is coming. And sure enough, this is like the last major push. And so it's called the Battle of the Bulge because you see this is where the original front is. And then here, this dotted line right here, this is where the front is on December 20th. And then this little dot over here, this is where it is on December 25th. So the Germans are able to push back, almost breaking that line, but they manage to hold on. They don't break it, which is why it's called the Battle of the Bulge. But there's all kinds of, people freezing. It's really really intense fighting there as well. But it's pretty clear, that the Germans are not going to give up, even though the Allies are the ones that have the upper hand in this case, okay? Alright. Let's continue with, the Yalta Conference. Now, this one, it's FDR Churchill Stlin. It takes place in February 1945. And what they're going to talk about here is the division of Germany. Okay? Here it is. Now, they're starting to plan what's going to happen to Germany after the war. Okay? The Soviets are pushing for an idea of dividing the nation into 4 sectors like you see here, and having each of the nations look after one of the sectors. Now, instead of a coalition government, they want each government to look into having an area to watch over. Berlin, however, where is Berlin? Right here. Berlin itself will be divided into 4 as well. And if you notice the zones of occupations here, you have the United States here, Great Britain, Soviet Union, and France. Okay, now the idea about this is to keep Germany divided until the end of the war is over. Make sure that the Germans do not pose a threat. But as you can see, FDR is pretty sick by then. Okay. Now, if you remember what that picture looked like on board the ship at the Arcadia Conference, look how much he's aged. And he will actually pass away shortly after re-inauguration. And his vice president is going to take over. His name, of course, is Truman. Okay, let me go over here. Truman becomes president. And very famously, there's this line where Truman reaches out to the First Lady, Eleanor Roosevelt, and told her, I'm so sorry for your loss. Is there anything I can do for you? And she said, oh, no, Harry. Is there anything that we can do for you? For you are the one that's in trouble now. And I think that that's very poignant because now it's all on Harry Truman's shoulders to bring an end to the war, bring the boys home, and take care of this threat once and for all. So, Yalta Conference, they decide, they come up with what's going to happen to Germany after the war. they start to plan for it. In addition to that, which one was it? Okay, anyways, here we have, FDR is now gone. He was elected 4 times. President dies shortly after, and now it's all on President Truman to get us out of it. Now, as the Russians get closer and closer to Berlin, and the Allies get closer and closer to Germany as well from the west, pretty much everybody goes into panic mode in Germany, and there's all kinds of mass suicides that happen throughout the country. Hitler is one of those that is said to have committed suicide on April 30th, 1945. There's all kinds of speculation whether that did happen or didn't. I'll let you guys decide that one. The jury is still out for me anyways, because it seems like there's more and more evidence that he may have at least made it out of Germany. So we don't know for sure just yet, but we'll just have to wait and see what history has to say about that. Now, on May 8th, 1945, just a week after Hitler commits suicide, victory in Europe will be declared. And, of course, celebrations are going to break out all over the world, and especially in the United States, when they're able to capture Germany and they surrender. But that victory will be sort of tempered by the fact that the British and the Americans are going to start to get a look at what was going on in those concentration camps. The Holocaust, of course, is the million of over 6 million people. What Hitler referred to as the final solution, with these undesirable people, the Untermensch, all of the inferior races, all the inferior people. The actual number of casualties, of people that died in the camps, is actually a lot closer to 11 million, because it wasn't just Jews. It was gypsies, or the other word for them is Romani, homosexuals, political prisoners, communists, Jehovah's Witnesses, Russian POWs, Polish, the handicapped, people in wheelchairs, that sort of thing. Those that were taken in and medical experiments were performed on them. I mean, all kinds of just horrible, horrible things that they did. And, when the Nuremberg trials take place, one of the things that these Nazis keep coming back to is, they say, when they ask them, why did you do this? Their response is, I was just following orders. And so, later on we'll talk about the Nuremberg trials, and especially in light of the, the civil rights movement that takes place in the United States. The Soviets, the Germans, they're all going to use what's happening in the United States, the murder of Emmett Till, the segregation law, the fact that African Americans are treated like second-class citizens in their own country when they fought for their own country, are going to be used as examples as why the United States is a hypocrite, especially when, they're saying that they did this to people that were unwanted, to people that were undesirable, when in America, we kind of do the same thing. Obviously not put people in concentration camps, although we do. But we'll talk about that a little bit later on, okay? I believe, is this it for us here? Yes. So I'm going to go ahead and stop it there. And the next one is going to be the war in the Pacific. And so just, try to stay with all of these little lectures. And so we've done part 4, Part 5 is next.